Toronto area home sellers are facing a barrage of lowball bids. And let's break down this info, talk about if you're a seller, what exactly are some of the things you can do to avoid getting those lowball bids. And if you're a buyer, how maybe making those lowball bids might actually be hurting you in the long run. I'm Michael Ouzas, I'm a realtor here in the city of Toronto. If you ever want to discuss your plans or your strategy for the spring market, which looks like it's just about to get fired up here in Toronto real estate as we hopefully get some better weather, click on that first link in the description down below or scan that QR code and book in a spring market strategy session with me anytime that works for you. What we've been seeing as the market has been trending along here in 2025 is uncertainty. Uncertainty across the board for buyers and sellers and what exactly is going on, especially as the media comes out with all these articles all the time about Toronto real estate. If we take a deeper look into Toronto real estate and what exactly is going on under the hood, we do have a tale of essentially five markets. We have the condo market, which is divided up between the smaller one bedroom or studio units and the larger two bedroom units. And I'd actually argue there's maybe a third level for condos, and that's those loft style condos that are still very desirable even in today's market and are selling very, very quickly and for good pricing right now. Then we have the freehold market, which is divided up between semi-detached properties, which are very hot even still in Toronto in those best areas, and the detached market, which are also very hot right now. I'd also add in that the properties that need full gut job renos have been sitting longer than usual, especially because the cost of renovates are definitely up there right now, especially with all these tariff discussions and buyers not exactly knowing what those costs could turn into if they are taking on such a big project. One of the things that stands out before we jump into this article that talks about the barrage of lowball offers here is the Toronto market stats for one quick second. And the reason being is if we take a look at this, 416 proper, which is the city of Toronto proper, not the greater Toronto area, which is that 905, is actually up in pricing for detached and semi-detached year over year. And this is something that no one's been talking about from the media. This is something that no one's really been talking about on any of the short form content discussions, is that prices are up 1.1% of detached property. And if you really think about that, the average price of a detached in the city of Toronto is 1.7 million. So 1% of that is about $17,000 increase from last year, and semi-detached average price 1.337, which is up almost 2.5% or just over 2.5%, almost 3% from 2024, same period of time. And it was a slow march as we discussed in other videos. So just something to note as we move forward into this article. This one on the Global Mail, Toronto area home sellers face barrage of lowball bids. And this is showing a house on 14 Delaware Avenue in Toronto. Asking price was just under 2.7 million. A lowball bid of 2.1 million came in. It was rejected by the sellers and eventually sold for 2.75 million. This is very significant. And this is something that I really want to point out, because if you're a buyer and you're going out there to put as many low bids as possible, hoping to land a fish in the sea right now, if you're looking for a specific property in a specific area, especially a Victorian style home that's detached in a very prominent neighborhood of Toronto, the likelihood of getting that property for $500,000 or $600,000 below asking actually may not be too realistic of an offer price. The other piece of this is that this property sold for over the list price. Sometimes going in too low may in fact hurt your chances of actually landing a good deal on the property, because maybe if a buyer would have gone in at a little more reasonable number here on this offer, and also keep in mind that that's reflective of what the property is actually worth based on comparables. I did not run any of those numbers. This is just a good example here because it's in the article. You may have been able to snap up this property for a little bit less than that asking price. Instead, it ended up selling over asking. And essentially, if someone would have got any price below asking and knowing that someone else purchased it for 2.75, if you're a buyer, would that equate to a good deal to you? And I'd love to hear your thoughts down below on if you could have locked that in at a lower than asking price versus what it sold for. Does that equate to a good deal? Now we take a look at the rest of the article. It says that the Toronto area real estate market is increasingly drawing comparisons to the 1990s. Sales last month in the greater Toronto area, again, as keep in mind, that's not Toronto proper, reached their lowest level for month of March since 95. And that follows a February tally that also hadn't been seen in more than 2 decades. Now, and that's true. Toronto sales have been lower than we've seen in basically the last 20 years for February and March. And we all know that there's a big component there economically with what's going on in the USA, but also we do have an election coming up on April the 28th, depending on when you're watching this video. Now, if we take a look at some of the other factors in this article, it says says the difference today is that the recent low number of sales are a blip caused by uncertainty, unlike the prolonged downturn that lasted for a decade in the 90s. Buyers haven't vanished this spring, but many are hunkering down amidst a trade war, stock market gyrations, and an impending federal election. Sellers are still continuing to list. Unlike the paralysis gripping the market for stretches of 23 and 24, properties are selling this spring as buyers take advantage of looser conditions. In some cases, sellers are batting away the first buyers, trying their luck with lowball bids. And again, that was mentioned here as this listing at 291 Roxton received lowball offers of 1.9 million, 2 million for a 3-bedroom home, ultimately sold for just under 2.1 million. Now, if we do slide down to condos, and that is a bit of a different story than what we're seeing in the freehold market. Condo sales in GTA slid by 8.8% in March from February on a seasonally adjusted basis, which active listings also jumped 6% to their highest level on record. And this also goes on to say that buyers who intend to live in the units are willing to purchase. The most bloated inventory tends to be downtown towers with type of small 1-bedroom units that investors purchased pre-construction in the past. So let's take a moment to unpack those two things. The first one is if you're a buyer and looking to have success in today's market, and there is definitely inventory out there. However, the stuff that shows really well and is priced really well in the best areas of Toronto are selling, and they're selling very quickly. If you're a buyer that's going out there without a plan and strategy and just think that throwing in lowball offers will equal to success or equal a quote unquote great deal, maybe knowing what exactly that property should sell for and then offering something which is still not quite that number, but not too far off it so that sellers will actually take the time to try and negotiate a price. That's where we're seeing the most success for our buyers in today's market. Now, if you're a seller on the flip side, if your property does not show 10 out of 10 and there's any work to be done, or if the pricing is a little bit high, we are noticing that buyers are shying away from those properties because if the property is priced too high, those buyers aren't willing to go there. There's so many options on the market that they'll go look at instead and ultimately choose one of those properties at a lesser price if all things are relatively equal. So those are the things that we're seeing right now in Toronto real estate as what I would argue is the start of the spring market here now that Easter long weekend is finished. And we're hopefully going to get some better weather as we're ending the month of April and heading into the month of May with the election behind us. And hopefully whatever trade wars discussed are also in the back burner. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below on what you think is going to come. Are we going to get a late spring market rush here as we move forward into summer months? I'm Michael Ouzas. Thanks for watching.